God bless everyone. Today I will share the testimony of Harold Montgomery, a former atheist scientist who experienced a vision that changed everything. In his journey, he was plunged into a realm of unimaginable darkness and suffering. And there, amid the endless torment, he saw a figure that shocked him to his core. It was a moment that forced Harold to confront the limits of human knowledge, awakening in him questions about life, truth, and the path of Jesus. Now I'm going to read Harold's letter just as it is, and together we'll uncover the depths of his doubts, his sins, and why the person he saw is there. I was once a man of unwavering certainty, a former academic, highly rational, and fiercely dedicated to reason. My name is Harold Montgomery, and I wore the title of atheist like a badge of honor. Friends and colleagues praised my intellect, but beneath their admiration, I sensed that they saw me as stubborn, unyielding. I was known not for kindness or empathy, but for my relentless skepticism, my sharp tongue ready to dismantle any argument grounded in faith. To me, belief in God was nothing more than an outdated fairy tale, a crutch for the weak-minded. I reveled in intellectual debates, convinced that science alone held the answers to life's mysteries. This confidence became my fortress, a place where I felt safe, far from any notion of divinity. My disdain for faith took root in my childhood, under the roof of a cold, unloving father who, ironically, was a pastor. His sermons were not messages of love or grace. They were thunderous proclamations of punishment, each word laced with fire and brimstone. In our home, warmth was a rare commodity, and I grew to resent the very idea of religion. Science and logic became my sanctuary, the lenses through which I viewed the world. The works of Newton and Darwin seemed to offer a clarity my father's sermons never could. By the time I reached university, my rejection of God had crystallized into a kind of personal creed. I laughed at those who spoke of souls and spirits, quick to point out the absurdity of their beliefs. My world was one of facts and evidence, and anything that veered into the spiritual was dismissed as foolishness. Yet, as much as I tried to deny it, there was always something gnawing at the edges of my mind, a whisper of unease that I could never fully silence. Despite my confidence in science, a deep-seated restlessness lingered within me, an unspoken fear that I buried beneath layers of logic and reason. I'd scoffed at faith, mocked it even, but there was something in the quiet of my heart that tugged at me, something I didn't understand and didn't want to confront. It was a fear of the unknown, of things I couldn't control, a haunting suspicion that maybe, just maybe, I didn't know everything. Little did I realize then, this shadow in my mind was waiting, patient and silent, to reveal itself in the most unexpected, unsettling way. And when it did, my carefully constructed walls of disbelief would crumble, leaving me with questions I had never allowed myself to ask. It was a day like any other in the summer of 2017. The sky was clouded, a muted gray that hung low over my small English village, casting shadows over the cobblestone streets and damp earth. I set out on my daily walk, a ritual of sorts, one that allowed me to mull over my thoughts in solitude. I walked the familiar paths, barely noticing the quaint houses or the occasional passerby as I drifted deep into contemplation. My mind was a fortress, locked onto the world of science, theories, and ideas that made sense to me, offering clarity and purpose. That day, I was so lost in my thoughts, considering the next book I'd read, the next theory to dissect, that I barely noticed the weight settling over me, a subtle, creeping heaviness I couldn't explain, and yet, something within me stirred uneasily. Suddenly, a sharp, unforgiving pain shot through my chest, striking like a hammer. I gasped, my hand instinctively clutching my chest as my knees buckled. The world around me seemed to slow, then blur. My pulse roared in my ears as I stumbled to the ground, my vision dimming at the edges. The pain intensified, relentless, as if it was ripping through the very fabric of my being. Panic clawed at me as I fought for breath, but my lungs refused to obey. I felt life slipping away, leaving me powerless and vulnerable. And in that helplessness, for the first time, the certainty of my beliefs wavered. What lay beyond this? My mind reached out desperately for an answer, but all I found was an overwhelming, suffocating void. Then, as if the earth itself swallowed me whole, everything went dark. This darkness wasn't the quiet, empty kind I'd always imagined in death. No, it was thick, suffocating, alive with a presence that I could feel pressing down on me from every angle. I was sinking, pulled deeper and deeper into a realm that defied everything I understood. It was as though the darkness had a heartbeat, a pulse that reverberated through my soul, filling me with a terror unlike anything I had ever known. I struggled to rationalize it, to cling to some fragment of logic, but each attempt slipped away, leaving me more vulnerable, more alone. The darkness closed in, filled with distant, tortured whispers and cries that echoed through the abyss. And yet, as fear gripped me, I knew this was just the beginning. I was descending into something far beyond my comprehension, and what lay ahead was a truth I had spent my life denying, a truth I could no longer escape. The darkness thickened, folding in on itself, and from its depths emerged shadowed figures, their forms twisted in torment. Shapes began to materialize, writhing and trembling, some clawing at the air as if grasping for a way out of this nightmare, while others seemed frozen in agony, their expressions caught between fear and despair. My eyes strained to make sense of the figures around me, and in horror, I recognized some of them. Faces I had seen only in textbooks and portraits, scholars and minds I had once admired, now disfigured and suffering in ways that words cannot capture. Their silent screams echoed through the void, a chorus of regret and anguish that reverberated in my mind, tearing apart the last remnants of comfort and rationality I held on to. This was no place of imagination. This was a realm of punishment, of horror beyond anything I had believed possible. As I stumbled through this hellish landscape, my eyes fell upon a figure that shook me to my core. Albert Einstein himself, seated upon a throne of fire. His wild, familiar hair was scorched and singed, his face etched with sorrow and regret that seemed to weigh upon him like chains. In his hands, he clutched a parchment filled with equations, the very symbols of the universe's secrets. But as I watched, the symbols disintegrated into ash, slipping through his fingers like sand. His gaze met mine, and in his eyes, I saw a despair so profound it was as if he carried the weight of humanity's sins upon his shoulders. In a voice that trembled yet cut through the chaos like a blade, he spoke. To declare the human mind as an absolute God, that was my greatest error. His words pierced me, leaving me paralyzed, the arrogance of my own disbelief crashing down around me. Einstein, a man I had idolized for his intellect, was here, condemned, not for lack of knowledge, but for his reverence of it above all else. Around him, other minds emerged from the shadows, scientists, philosophers, figures I once admired and respected, now trapped in this eternal suffering. Their faces mirrored my own fears, their agony a reflection of the path I had chosen. One figure clutched at his chest, crying out, "We worshipped knowledge, but knowing did not save us." Those words echoed through me, unraveling everything I had believed. In that moment, I realized the terrifying consequence of placing reason and knowledge above all else, of dismissing faith as mere superstition. My own beliefs, once a fortress, now felt like a prison, walls closing in as the shadows of those lost minds surrounded me. And as I stood there, trembling, the voices grew louder, each one a painful reminder of my own arrogance. What lay ahead? Was there a chance of escape, Or was I destined to join them in this infernal place? I felt the pull, drawing me deeper, and I knew that what awaited me was a truth I was not prepared to face. Hell was not the fiery pit I had once dismissed in tales and sermons. It was something far more oppressive, a bottomless abyss where the very air seemed saturated with agony. Every direction I turned, the darkness stretched on, endless and unyielding, pressing down on me as if it had weight, as if it could crush the very spirit from within. The screams of tormented souls echoed through the void, a relentless, sorrowful cacophony that pierced my mind and unsettled my soul. These cries weren't mere sounds. They were imbued with suffering so profound that each one reverberated with the despair of lifetimes lost, regrets never reconciled, and sins never forgiven. There was no escape from these cries. They surrounded me, filled me, becoming as much a part of the place as the ground beneath my feet. I knew then that this was not just hell. It was despair given form. The air was thick with the choking stench of burning sulfur, searing my lungs with each breath. Rivers of molten lava cut through the landscape like open wounds, their fiery glow casting an eerie, blood-red hue over everything around me. The ground itself was fractured and unstable, radiating heat that seeped through my body, igniting a pain that felt like it reached down into my very bones. Above, a dark, impenetrable fog loomed, swirling as if alive, moving and shifting like an entity with a mind of its own. It wasn't just thick, it was suffocating, an overwhelming presence that stole every breath of hope. With each step, the fog seemed to close in tighter, as if it were feeding on my fear, amplifying the dread that had already rooted itself deep within my heart. It was as if this fog, this darkness, was sentient, aware of my presence and intent on swallowing every trace of light within me. Through the haze, shadowy figures writhed, barely visible but unmistakable in their agony, each one trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. They moved within the fog like ghosts bound to their torment, their movements slow and heavy, as if weighed down by invisible chains. I felt their suffering merging with my own, each shadow a reflection of my own growing terror, each scream a mirror to my regrets. The atmosphere was thick with despair, each shift of the shadows, each muffled cry, a reminder that I was in a place where no salvation existed, where the very concept of mercy was foreign. My heart raced, my body tense, and in that moment, I knew that whatever lay deeper within this place held truths I wasn't ready to face. But there was no turning back. The path ahead beckoned, a relentless pull that demanded I keep going deeper into the heart of this nightmare, where the true face of hell waited, hidden just beyond the fog. In an instant, a rush of cold air filled my lungs, jolting me back to life. The suffocating darkness, the unbearable heat, the screams, all of it was replaced by the blare of ambulance sirens and the blurred outline of a paramedic leaning over me, his voice thick with urgency as he called my name. My heart hammered painfully in my chest, each beat a fierce reminder that I was still tethered to the world of the living. The paramedic's gloved hands were cool against my skin, grounding me in a reality that felt distant and fragile. Yet, even as my senses began to clear, the haunting images of hell clung to my mind, vivid and raw. The weight of what I had seen, the torments and regrets of those lost souls, pressed against my heart, leaving me shaken in a way that no earthly experience ever could. As I opened my eyes fully, the harsh, sterile light around me only sharpened the memories of that dark abyss. I could still see the faces of those figures in agony, could hear Einstein's regret-filled words as if they were burned into my mind. It forced me to confront a truth I had long buried, a truth that my rigid belief in science had masked but never erased. For so long, I had clung to the idea that logic and reason were enough, that they held all the answers, dismissing anything that couldn't be explained by science as superstition. But in those few moments, I had glimpsed a reality that shattered those convictions, a reality that demanded more than rationality. I realized then, lying on that stretcher with the paramedic's steady gaze urging me to stay calm, that my beliefs were as fragile as I was. My mind, once so sure, now reeled with questions I could no longer ignore. In the days that followed, I found myself looking at life with new eyes. My certainty had been replaced by a quiet humility, a sense that perhaps I had been missing something all along. I knew I had to reach out to those I had once held at arm's length, especially my daughter, whose faith I had once mocked. Our conversations shifted from debates to understanding, and for the first time, I listened, really listened. I began to see that science and faith need not be at odds, that perhaps the mysteries of existence could be explored with both mind and heart. I felt a strange peace settle over me, a balance I had never thought possible. But even as I embraced this new journey, I knew there was still more to uncover. The memory of that dark realm still lingered, pulling me forward, as if whispering that my story was far from over and that somewhere, hidden in the vast unknown, lay a final revelation awaiting me. I'd love to hear what you think about this incredible journey. Do you believe science and faith can coexist, or do you see them as fundamentally separate? Have you ever experienced something that made you question your beliefs? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I can't wait to read them and continue this conversation with all of you.